Captain Lucas Grant felt the heat of the alien planet's twin suns beating down on his face as he stumbled through the dense forest. The dust kicked up around his boots, mixing with the scent of scorched earth. His comm device had been destroyed in the attack, leaving him with no way to call for help. He was alone. Alone, and on a planet far from the one he had sworn to protect. He glanced up, the sky a swirl of red and orange, a constant reminder that he was no longer on Earth. The Zelkari had attacked without warning, their ships appearing out of nowhere, their weapons devastating. He had been part of a small human fleet sent to help defend the frontier, but the battle was lost before it had even begun. The Zelkari were a race of fierce warriors, known throughout the galaxy for their strength and ruthlessness. They were led by a queen whose reputation alone struck fear into the hearts of even the most seasoned soldiers. Lucas had heard the stories. Queen Zaris, the feared and unyielding ruler of the Zelkari, was a figure of myth and legend, a queen who had never shown mercy, and whose wrath was said to be uncontainable. Those who crossed her were either dead or wished they were. To her, humans were nothing more than pests, weak, insignificant creatures to be crushed underfoot. Yet, here he was, a human soldier, stranded on her planet, caught in the grip of her empire. He pushed forward, his mind working quickly to come up with a plan. He had no idea where he was or how far the Zelkari had taken him, but he knew one thing for certain. He had to survive. His mission had failed and his men were either dead or captured, but he still had a purpose: to live and warn Earth of the threat that lay ahead. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden sound of movement. He tensed, instinctively reaching for his weapon. But it was gone. The Zelkari had taken everything from him. He scanned the trees, his heart racing. A group of Zelkari soldiers emerged from the underbrush, their tall, imposing figures almost blending into the shadows. Their armored bodies gleamed in the dim light, their eyes glowing with an eerie green hue. They were armed with weapons that looked like they could tear through steel. "Capture him!" one of the soldiers barked in their harsh, guttural language. Before Lucas could react, two soldiers lunged at him, grabbing him by the arms and forcing him to the ground. He struggled, but it was no use. They were too strong. They pulled him to his feet and dragged him toward a transport ship that had landed nearby. As they approached the ship, Lucas could see the dark silhouette of a figure standing at the top of the ramp. The figure was tall, regal, and powerful. No doubt the queen herself. He had been prepared to face death, but there was something different about the way she stood. She wasn't just a ruler. She was a force of nature, and he could feel her presence even from a distance. The soldiers dragged him up the ramp, and as he was shoved inside the ship, Lucas saw her. Queen Zaris. She was everything the stories had said she would be. Her long silver hair flowed down her back like a waterfall, and her piercing blue eyes seemed to see right through him. Her skin was pale, almost luminescent, and her high cheekbones and sharp features gave her an otherworldly beauty that was almost unsettling. Zaris didn't speak at first. She simply watched him with a cold, calculating gaze, as if deciding whether he was worthy of her attention. "Leave us," she commanded. The soldiers hesitated for a moment, but when she fixed them with a glare, they quickly obeyed, retreating from the room. Zaris slowly walked toward Lucas, her movements graceful and controlled, her presence commanding the room.
"You are human,"
she said, her voice low and smooth.
"Why are you here?"
Lucas didn't answer immediately. He had been trained for moments like this, but it was hard to keep his cool when he was face to face with the most feared ruler in the galaxy. He swallowed hard and finally spoke. "I was sent here as part of a peace mission," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. "We didn't know your people would attack."
"We never meant any harm."
Zaris tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. "Peace?" she repeated. "Your people are weak. You bring nothing but destruction wherever you go." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you can change that with words?" Lucas felt a surge of anger. He had seen the devastation his people had caused. but he had also seen the good. He had seen the sacrifices, the hopes, and the dreams of the humans who fought for peace, but he knew better than to argue with her. Instead, he stood tall, meeting her gaze without flinching. "We fight for survival just like you," he said quietly. Zari scoffed, turning away from him. "Survival?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You are a dying species. Your weakness is your undoing. You are nothing compared to the Zelkari." Lucas didn't flinch. "You're wrong," he said, his voice firm. "You may think we're weak, but you've never truly fought us. You've never seen the strength we have when we fight for what's right." She paused, and for a moment he thought he saw something flicker in her eyes. Something that wasn't hatred, but curiosity. It was brief, a mere flash, but it was there. Zari's turned back to face him, her expression unreadable. "We will see if your strength is enough to survive in my empire," she said coldly. "Take him to the dungeons. We will see how long he lasts." Before he could respond, 2 soldiers grabbed him once more, dragging him out of the room and down the dark corridors of the ship. The Queen's last words echoed in his mind. "We will see if your strength is enough." As they threw him into a dark, cold cell, Lucas couldn't help but wonder what she really thought of him. Did she truly hate him, or was there something more beneath her words? Something that told a different story, something that spoke of a deeper connection between them. He didn't know the answer, but he knew one thing for sure. He was far from defeated. Queen Zaris might think of him as nothing more than a prisoner, but Lucas had faced worse. He had faced death before, and he had survived. This time would be no different. The cold, damp air of the dungeon seeped into Lucas's bones as he lay on the hard stone floor, staring up at the low, arched ceiling. His mind raced, thinking over everything that had happened since he'd been taken aboard the Exalkari ship. The Queen's words echoed in his head. "We will see if your strength is enough to survive in my empire." The cold was unbearable, and the silence was even worse. The cell was dark, save for the flickering light of a single torch on the wall outside. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, and Lucas couldn't help but wonder what kind of game Zaris was playing. He had been trained for war, but this felt different. There was something in her eyes, something that made him uneasy. Was it truly hatred? Or was it something else? His mind wandered back to the moment he had first laid eyes on her. Queen Zaris had been as cold and terrifying as the stories had promised, yet there had been something else in her gaze, a flicker of emotion that wasn't quite hatred. It was almost like curiosity. But why? Why would a queen, someone so powerful and untouchable, show any interest in a prisoner like him? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing in the hallway outside his cell. The footsteps grew louder, and the door to his cell swung open with a harsh creak. 2 Zelkari soldiers entered, their tall, imposing forms filling the doorway. "Get up," one of them ordered, his voice cold and emotionless. Lucas didn't hesitate. He stood up slowly, his muscles stiff from the long hours spent lying on the cold stone floor. The soldiers grabbed him by the arms and pulled him out of the cell, dragging him down the dark corridor. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest as he wondered where they were taking him. The walls seemed to close in on him, the dim light barely enough to see by. He tried to steady his breathing, but the tension in the air was thick, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. They reached a large chamber, and Lucas was thrown into a chair in the center of the room. It was a wide open space with large windows that looked out over the vast alien landscape. The sky was a deep red, and the twin suns hovered low on the horizon. The room itself was decorated in sharp, geometric patterns, the kind of decor that seemed cold and impersonal, much like the Zelkari themselves. "Sit," one of the soldiers commanded. Lucas sat without a word, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of what was to come. He didn't have to wait long. The heavy door at the far end of the room opened, and Queen Zaris entered. She walked with the grace of someone who was used to commanding attention. Her silver hair trailed behind her like a stream of liquid light, and her piercing blue eyes locked onto Lucas the moment she stepped into the room. "Captain Lucas Grant," she said, her voice calm but full of authority. "It seems you are still alive. I must admit I did not expect that." Lucas met her gaze without flinching. "You seem disappointed," he replied, his voice steady. Zaris raised an eyebrow, a small smirk playing at the corners of her lips. "Disappointed? No, I find you intriguing." He couldn't help but feel a surge of surprise at her words. Intriguing? He was nothing more than a prisoner. A human. To her, a weak, insignificant creature. "I've been wondering," she continued, her voice softer now, almost thoughtful. "Why do you fight? You've seen the power of the Zelkari. You've seen how we crush those who oppose us. Why do you continue to resist?" Lucas didn't answer right away. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him, as if she was trying to read his very soul. He swallowed, gathering his thoughts. "Because it's not about power," he said finally. "It's about survival. Every living being has the right to survive. Your people, your empire. You may have power, but you can't just take that away from others." Zaris stared at him for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as if processing his words. Then, without warning, she moved closer, her presence filling the room. She stopped just in front of him, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her. Lucas could see the faintest trace of a smile on her lips, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Survival," she murmured, as if tasting the word.
Such a simple answer, yet you make it sound so...
noble. He didn't respond. He wasn't sure what to say to her. Part of him wanted to lash out, to challenge her, but another part of him, one he wasn't entirely sure he understood, felt a strange connection to her. Something about the way she carried herself, something about the way she looked at him. It was as if she was searching for something. "Tell me," she said, her voice lowering to a near whisper, "what is it that drives a human to fight for survival? What is it that makes you different from the other species I've encountered?" Lucas took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. This wasn't a typical interrogation. This wasn't just about survival. There was something else at play here. "It's hope," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Humans fight because they believe in something more. They fight because they hope for a better future, even when it seems impossible."
Zaris looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism.
"Hope," she repeated. "Such a fragile thing." "Do you really believe that?" "I do," Lucas said, meeting her eyes. "Even in the face of impossible odds, we keep going. Because if we don't, what's left?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned away, walking slowly to the far side of the room. Her back was to him for a moment, but Lucas could feel her thoughts swirling in the air between them. Finally she spoke, her voice tinged with something that Lucas couldn't quite place. "You are not like the others," she said softly. "I have seen humans before, weak, frightened, driven by fear. But you, there is something different about you." Lucas wasn't sure how to respond to that. He was just a soldier, a man fighting for his people's survival. But in the face of Zaris's cold, calculating presence, he felt like something more. Like he had the power to make her see things differently. "Perhaps that's why you're still alive," she continued, her tone a little softer. "You are not like the others." "You are resilient." She turned back to face him, her piercing gaze fixed on him once more. "But I still don't understand. Why do you fight for something so fragile as hope? Why not bow to the inevitable?" Lucas opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the door to the room swung open, and a soldier entered, his expression tense. "Your Majesty," the soldier said, bowing low, "the council requests your presence." Zaris gave a slight nod, her expression unreadable. "I will be there shortly," she replied, her voice still calm, but there was a shift in the air. Something had changed. As the soldier exited, Zaris looked back at Lucas, her gaze lingering on him for a long moment. "This is not over," she said, her voice firm once again. "You will see things from my side soon enough. You may think you understand, but you do not. Not yet." With that, she turned and left the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence that followed. Lucas sat in the chair, his heart still racing. He had no idea what Zaris had meant, or what she was planning next, but one thing was certain. This wasn't just about survival anymore. There was something else, something more personal at play between him and the Queen. He didn't know what it was yet, but he was about to find out. The days passed slowly in the dark corridors of the Zelkari ship. Lucas spent most of his time in the small cell, waiting for something, anything, to change. The cold stone beneath him, the silence, and the occasional visits from the soldiers were all he had. But the longer he stayed, the more his thoughts turned back to Queen Zaris. What had she meant when she said he was different? Why did she seem so interested in him? At first he thought it was just another part of her game, a way to manipulate him, to get under his skin. But with each passing day, he began to wonder if there was more to it. Zaris had been different during their encounters. Cold, yes, but there were moments when her expression softened, when she seemed uncertain, and those moments intrigued him. One morning, after what felt like an eternity, the heavy door to his cell opened again. 2 soldiers entered, grabbing him by the arms as they had done countless times before. But this time, there was something different in their eyes. It wasn't the same cold detachment. It was almost hesitant. "Follow us," one of the soldiers said gruffly. Lucas didn't protest. He knew better than to resist now. They led him through the winding hallways, past the metal doors, and into the large chamber where he had met the Queen before. As they entered the room, Lucas saw her standing near the windows, looking out at the alien landscape. The twin suns hung low in the sky, casting a fiery glow over the planet's surface. She turned as they approached, her eyes locking onto Lucas's with that familiar, intense gaze. But today, there was something new, something less guarded in her expression. "Captain Grant," she said, her voice calm but with an undertone of something deeper, something almost vulnerable. "I've been thinking about our conversations." Lucas stood there, unsure of what to say. He had been expecting more of the same, mockery, threats, or maybe even a cruel punishment, but there was none of that today. Zaris wasn't the Queen who ruled with an iron fist. She was something different. Something human. "Your words. They have stayed with me," she continued, her voice softer now. "You speak of hope as if it's something worth fighting for." Lucas swallowed. "It is," he said quietly. "Hope is all we have. Without it, we have nothing." Zari stared at him, her sharp eyes never leaving his. "You truly believe that, don't you?" "I do," Lucas replied, his voice steady. "Hope keeps us moving forward. It gives us something to fight for, even when everything seems impossible." She was silent for a moment, contemplating his words. Then, slowly, she stepped closer to him, her movements deliberate and controlled. "And yet your kind is so fragile," she murmured, almost to herself. "You live with such fleeting things, emotions, hope, dreams. These are all so easily shattered." Lucas felt a pang of frustration rise in his chest. He knew what she was getting at. He had heard the same thing from others. Humans were weak, fragile creatures, easily crushed under the weight of the galaxy's problems. But that wasn't the truth. He knew it wasn't. "We may be fragile," he said, his voice firm, "but that doesn't mean we can't be strong. We fight through it all. We find ways to keep going." Zaris paused in front of him, her eyes flicking to his hands, which were still bound together by the ropes. Without a word, she reached out and untied the ropes, letting them fall to the ground. Lucas was caught off guard, but he didn't move, unsure of her intentions.
I find you
Fascinating, Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. You are different from the others. I see it in the way you stand, the way you speak. It is as if you are not afraid to challenge me. Lucas didn't know how to respond. He had never been afraid of her, not really. She was a queen, yes, but she was still just a person, and in the moments when their gazes locked, he saw something in her that didn't seem so different from him. She was driven by something beyond power, beyond control. He could see it now. She was just as trapped as he was, in a web of expectations, duties, and fears. Why are you doing this? He finally asked, his voice soft with curiosity. Why not just treat me like the others? Why all of this? Zaris took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling slowly. Because you are not like them, she said, her voice low, almost as if she were confessing something. I cannot ignore what you've said to me. Your words have unsettled me in a way that I cannot explain. I have never met a human who spoke with such conviction. Lucas studied her face, trying to read her expression, but it was unreadable. I'm just a soldier, he said quietly. Nothing more. She turned away, her back to him for a moment, and Lucas saw the tension in her posture. It was the first time he had seen her show any sign of weakness, and for a brief moment, he felt a strange kind of connection to her. It was as if, in that moment, she was as lost as he was. Zaris let out a long breath, her voice barely above a whisper. I have been taught to hate your kind, to view you as nothing more than a threat, a nuisance, and yet, here I am, standing before you, questioning everything I have ever known. Lucas's heart began to race. He could feel the weight of her words, the raw honesty in her voice. She was letting down her walls just for a moment, and he saw the real Queen Zaris, the one who wasn't just a ruler, but a woman, a person, struggling with her own doubts. You don't have to hate us, Lucas said gently. We're not all enemies. We're just trying to survive, just like you. Zaris looked back at him, her eyes intense and searching. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if the world outside had stopped, and all that mattered was the space between them. Then, without warning, she stepped closer to him again, her voice barely audible. What if you are wrong? She asked softly. What if all the things you believe are nothing more than illusions? What if the truth is that the strong must rule, and the weak must fall? Lucas didn't know how to answer. He had always believed in the idea of hope, of fighting for something greater than himself. But as he looked into her eyes, he couldn't help but wonder if she was right. Was there a point where hope became nothing more than a dream, a fantasy to keep them going? Was the galaxy really a place for the strong alone? I don't know, he said finally, but I'd rather fight for something than give up and let it all fall apart. Zaris studied him for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. Then, almost as if she had made a decision, she nodded slowly. Perhaps you are right, she said softly. Perhaps there is more to this than I have been taught. For the first time since he had met her, Lucas saw a flicker of something new in her eyes, something that wasn't cold or calculating, but curious, almost hopeful. And for a moment, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they weren't so different after all. The tension between Lucas and Queen Zaris had shifted. What began as a cold, dangerous relationship had slowly transformed into something more complicated, more uncertain. The queen who had once mocked him now seemed to listen to his words, ponder his thoughts, and sometimes, though rarely, express something that could be called curiosity. But that day something felt different. Something had changed inside the walls of the Zelkari palace. The air was thick with anticipation. The rebellion against her rule had been growing for months now, and the time had come for Zaris to take action. Lucas knew it. He could see it in her eyes as she paced in front of him. Her regal appearance had not changed, but there was something about her. Something softer that spoke volumes. "You're not just a soldier, are you?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm as she turned to face him. Her silver hair shimmered like moonlight in the dim glow of the room. "You're different." Lucas stood before her, his heart pounding in his chest. The cold room seemed to shrink around them, the silence between them filled with unsaid words. He had been here before, in this strange place of uncertainty, where the boundaries between enemy and ally were blurred. He had once thought of this queen as nothing more than a cold ruler, a being whose hatred for humans ran deep. But the more he got to know her, the more he realized that there was something more, something that made her more than just a figurehead, more than just a ruler. Zaris had confided in him in a way that he hadn't expected. He hadn't expected the queen to share her thoughts, her doubts, her fears. He hadn't expected her to question everything she had been taught. He hadn't expected any of this, but here they were, standing in the dim light, their fates intertwined in a way neither of them fully understood. "I'm not sure what you mean," Lucas replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm just a man, like any other." Zarya studied him carefully, her expression unreadable. "No," she said slowly. "You are not just any man. You've been different from the others. I see something in you that I don't understand." Her gaze softened for a brief moment before she looked away, her hands clasped behind her back. Lucas's heart raced as he tried to make sense of her words. Was she finally letting her guard down? Was she finally seeing him as something more than just a prisoner? Something more than just a human to be manipulated? "You are a soldier," she continued, her voice growing colder, but not in the way it had been before. "But you are also a symbol of the strength that your kind carries within them. I see it in the way you stand. I see it in your eyes. You never give up, do you?" He hesitated. "No," he said softly. "I don't." For a long moment, Zaris was silent. Then, as if making a decision, she turned to face him fully. "I'm going to need your help," she said, her voice more commanding than before. "The rebellion has grown too strong. If we don't act soon, the Zelkari will be divided beyond repair. I've tried to hold them together with force, but they are no longer afraid of me." Lucas could see the pain in her eyes, though she masked it well. The queen had never been one to show vulnerability, yet here she was, admitting that her power was slipping away. She had fought for so long to keep control, to maintain her reign. But now she was standing before him, asking for help. "How can I help?" he asked, his voice quiet, but with the weight of the question hanging between them. Zaris looked at him with a strange intensity. "I need you to fight for me," she said. "I need you to fight alongside me." Lucas felt the weight of her words. The Zelkari had once been a symbol of invincible power, a force that seemed unstoppable. But now, it seemed as though their empire was on the brink of collapse. Zaris was the ruler. But even she was not immune to the cracks in her own kingdom.
I don't understand,
Lucas said, his brow furrowing. "Why would you want me to fight for you? You've said it yourself. Humans are weak, insignificant. Why would you trust me now?" Zaris's gaze softened, and for the first time, he saw something close to sincerity in her eyes. "Because you've shown me that strength is not about power alone. It's not about brute force or fear. Strength is about resilience. Strength is about standing up for something, even when the odds are against you." She paused, taking a step closer to him. "And you, Captain Grant, are the strongest person I've ever met." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if she was speaking to manipulate him, or if there was something deeper in her words. But in that moment, he realized that the Queen was no longer the enemy he had thought her to be. She was not just a ruler. She was a woman, struggling with her own doubts, her own fears. He had never expected this. He had never expected to stand before her, not as a prisoner, but as an ally. "Your kind is not weak," Zaris continued, her voice quiet. "And I've seen that now. I've seen the strength you carry, even when you don't realize it." Lucas didn't know what to say. He had never thought of himself as anything special. He was just a soldier, someone who had fought for his people's survival. But now, standing before the most powerful ruler in the galaxy, he realized that maybe he had something to offer. Maybe he could help her fight for her empire, help her fight for something that was worth saving. "I'll help you," he said finally, his voice steady. Zaris looked at him with a mix of surprise and relief. She nodded, as if his words had confirmed something she had been hoping for. "I knew you would," she said softly. The room was silent for a moment. Then Zaris turned away, moving to the large window once more. "There is much to be done," she said, her voice quieter now. "The rebellion grows stronger with each passing day. If we are to stand a chance, we must act quickly." Lucas nodded, his resolve hardening. He had come to this place as an enemy, but now he stood here as an ally. The fate of 2 worlds rested in their hands. The Zelkari Empire was on the brink of destruction, and he had a part to play in saving it. "Where do we start?" he asked. Zaris glanced over her shoulder, her expression hardening once more. "We start by showing them that we will not be broken. We will show them that the Zelkari will not fall. Not while I still stand." Lucas could see the fire in her eyes, the same fire he had seen in the eyes of soldiers who refused to give up, even when victory seemed impossible. Zaris was not the queen he had first thought her to be. She was a woman, a leader, and she had something to fight for, and now he did too. Together they would face the rebellion. Together they would fight for the future of the Zelkari. They would fight for hope, for strength, for survival. And in the end, perhaps they would discover that their enemies were not as different as they had once thought. The room grew quiet again. The sound of their breathing, the only noise. There was still much to do, and the road ahead was uncertain. But Lucas had a new purpose now. And in Zaris, he had found an ally, a queen, and perhaps, just perhaps, a friend.